Welcome to Civilnet. I'm Sareen Habeshian. I'm here today with Eric Hacopian, a political consultant with over 25 years of experience in American politics. He's here today to give us context about yesterday's parliamentary debate between the 11 candidates running for parliament. Thank you for being here with us today.
Pleasure.
So what did we learn from the debate last night?
I think we learned, or if you're actually a voting citizen of Armenia, you learned very little about the programmatic approaches that people are going to have to governance, depending on who comes to power. I think you learn a lot about the tactics of each of the campaigns and who perceives who as a threat. It was very clear to me that there's a competition between the Sarukyan's party and the Lusabur Hayastan for second place, because it was very clear that the questions were all aimed at each other, specifically Edmond Manukyan from the Lusabur Hayastan party, who went after Sarukyan about his business interests, his casinos. So it was very clear that they're tactically fighting for second place. I think they want to finish second, and one of the two of them will finish second and third, depending on how accurate the polls are. The secondly is, which stood out a bit, is Nikol took his opportunity to ask a question to go after a party that isn't likely to make the parliament. It was over the Social Democratic Party. It was the most leftist party, and he sort of attacked them from the right, asking what is their position on capitalism or what they had said in the past. So that was, to me, if you're already in a title of prime minister, you don't do that unless you're trying to send some kind of a message.
And what do you think the message was?
I think the message is, there's been so much talk from the Republican Party about business is not investing and things of that sort. I think he's trying to send a message of which side of the line he's on. It's a subtle one, but I think that was clear. But mostly, unfortunately, the conversations were not very fruitful, because the entire focus was on the Republican Party, their past, and their presence there, and their constant attacks on Nikol, the back and forth on the corruption. Again, reinforces the fact that this is not the first act of day one in Armenia. It's the last act of the revolution, and people are still fighting over. I mean, Vigen Sarkisyan's question from Aram Sarkisyan was about his prime ministership in 1999, when a good part of the voters were not even alive. So I think there's or of an age to follow anything. So it's rather, it was rather interesting in that sense. So I think it was not particular. There was a lot of heat, but very little light.
Mm-hmm. And what didn't they talk about that you would have liked to see?
Well, I mean, all of them talk about economic development, jobs, raising incomes, but then they managed to not talk about the three areas of the bright spots of the Armenian economy over the last couple of years. I don't think those areas are bright, not because of particular policies, but they just happen to be that. And one of them is the high-tech sector, which no one said a word about, when it's the country's #1 good-paying job growth sector and income earner. Secondly is tourism, which is growing 10-15% a year, but it's far behind places like Georgia, in which we get 1 million tourists here a year. They get 5 million. They earn $3 billion from tourism just this year. Imagine if you can take that 1 million and make it 3 million, because for every 100 visitors you create one job. So you get to 3 million, you've created 20,000 jobs, and no one talked about it. And lastly was agricultural exports, which create a lot of lower jobs for ordinary people that don't have high education. And right now, with the daily flights to the Gulf, you have a lot of these agricultural exports from these hothouses that they never even see the light of day in Hayastan. They just get exported. And no one talked about any of these things.
Pashinyan kept bringing up economic growth and job growth, but Sarkisyan was refuting those numbers that Pashinyan was giving.
I think those statistical, it was hard not to laugh when they kept bringing out these statistical models of things failing, because first of all, there's this great story about, Mao was asked in the 1970s what he thought about the French Revolution, and he said that it's too early to have a concrete judgment about it. So here, they're trying to pass judgment on something that happened 5 months ago in concrete terms. Everybody knows when you have political upheaval, even when you have an election in the United States, for example, investments, business stops to see what's going on before things continue. And even in that environment, we've had continued growth. So it's somewhat disingenuous. And lastly, having talked to many Armenian voters, I don't think there's 1 in 100 that actually believes any of these numbers from anyone anyway. So it's sort of silly to bring these things up about what is, people see it, concrete things in their lives. If I was Nicole, I would talk about the fact that, the price of sugar has dropped, the price of bananas has dropped, just basic things that matter to ordinary people, rather than just statistical numbers, some of whom are anomalies, 3%, 5%. It's not a dramatic difference in that.
This debate was the first in Armenia, this parliamentary debate. What is significant about that in and of itself?
I think, you know what, it's a very good question. We don't, I've talked about this before on other outlets. We don't appreciate the moment enough. You can, drive from here north, and you'll have to drive 3 days to get to the Baltic states to have a political system that is as open as Armenia's, with all of its problems. And if you're driving east, you'll go through Azerbaijan, all of the stans, China, Mongolia, North Korea, before you get to South Korea, where you can have a political system that is as open as Armenia's. And given the country's history, its location, its geography, I think it's quite a testament to what the Armenian people achieved in April and May.
Yesterday, a wiretapped conversation was released between Acting Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and the Chief of the National Security Service. And they talked about this in the debate. Why do you think they're having these important, somewhat worrying conversations on the phone in the first place?
Well, frankly, it's idiotic. I mean, just basic, anybody on any level, if you are on that level in any government around the world, your conversations are being listened to, if not by local actors, which I suspect is the case here, by foreign actors. So I don't know why anybody would have any of these conversations, no matter what the morality of it is, if you think is right or wrong. I just can't imagine why anyone would have these conversations over the phone when, even if you're in person, it's better to whisper than to talk out loud about these things. It's just, but the content of it, does it shock me that the prosecutions of that have gone on are politically motivated? Well, of course they're politically motivated. I mean, no one was prosecuting Kocharyan for 10 years. There's a regime change, and they're holding him accountable for things that have happened. Now, what's important is that, unlike the United States, the judges in Armenia actually play a role in indicting people. So it's disconcerting that you have that kind of conversations with the judges and try to influence them. So I don't think it's a good thing, but I think just on a practical level, it's very amateur hour to have these conversations. It was not hard to imagine that Khachaturian's arrest was going to anger the Russians. And if you listen to the conversation, the Russians say, first, call him back, and then you can do whatever you want. Obviously, the Russians don't even care. It's just a function of don't embarrass us. So I think there's a bit of amateur hour there. But it's clear to me that, we're nowhere in having a free judiciary as it should be. But then again, I don't think 90% of the world has that. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. Do
you think Pashinyan will lose any of his popular support over these released phone calls?
No, nobody cares. I mean, it's like, it does not shock anybody here that the prosecution of Kocharyan by Pashinyan is a political. Of course, it's a political act. What else could it be? Everything on that level is political. This isn't. Even in the United States, prosecutions of that kind, you'll see some bad actors who are on the gray area of the law, and they'll get prosecuted, and others who won't. It's a political judgment. So to say that it's politicizing the process, it's somewhat disingenuous, because you can't politicize politics more than it is. It is what it is.
Yesterday during the debate, they spent a significant amount of the time talking about Karabakh. and the Karabakh conflict. A lot of the parties seem to be working to have a more maximalist position on Karabakh. What do you think about that? No one seems to be talking about peace.
Well, I mean, I didn't expect anything other than that. There's an element of cheap populism there, because almost all of these people, except for the non sequitur parties that aren't going to get anywhere, I mean, Vigan Sarkisian knows the details of the Madrid protocols. Everybody knows what the outline of a peace agreement would look like. Now, will it happen or it won't happen? So this notion that you're going to take the maximalist position when multiple governments of different persuasions have had far less than that maximalist position, including Kocharyan in Key West in 2001, it's a bit disingenuous for people to take this maximalist position, because you can keep the maximalist position, but you can't have peace. So at some point, people need to be honest. But if I'm running any of their campaigns, would I tell them to take anything but the maximalist position? Of course not. It would be an absolute headache. You saw the problems that came about from Sasun Mikayan, I forget his last name, comments about Karabakh and the Velvet Revolution. It's sort of the third rail of Armenian politics, and the less you talk about it, the more maximalist positions you take, the better off you are. I don't know if that serves the country in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And do you think they'll follow through on these platforms on Karabakh once elected?
No, because at the end of the day, you don't make peace in front of 2 or 3 million people. You make peace with parties with great powers who could care less about, to the extent that they want to have peace. You cannot. Any peace deal between these two countries is going to be exceptionally unpopular in both countries. That's why, unfortunately, I don't see any movement of that in the near term.
Well, thank you, Eric, and we look forward to speaking to you again during these elections.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching Civilnet. I'm Sareen Habeshian. See you next time.